Are you looking for inspiration on a daily basis? Then check out Deal to Heal Teas. With our inspirational teas, you're sure to find something to inspire you. That's dealtohealteas.com. Put some inspiration in your situation. Wear inspirational tea and be inspired all day. Let's go to dealtohealteas.com. Again, that's dealtohealteas.com. Hey guys, if you're enjoying this podcast, then I know you'll enjoy the Girl Dad Discussion podcast. I'm your host, Ernest James, and I believe the relationship between a daughter and her father is one of the most important relationships a young lady can have. And therefore, my mission is to promote the daddy-daughter relationship by sharing the voices of girl dads to the world. So check out our podcast on every platform where podcasts can be listened to. And if you want to watch the podcast, check us out on our YouTube channel. Again, that's the Girl Dad Discussions podcast with your host, Ernest James. Welcome to Deal to Heal with E. James podcast. On this podcast, my guest and I will discuss topics and ways to help us to heal in every area of our lives. I believe that everyone can live a life that is happy, healthy, and whole. So I'm on a mission to help people to deal, heal, and fulfill. Deal with your problem, heal from the pain, and fulfill your purpose. Thanks for tuning in. Let's get to it. Welcome to the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast. I am your host, Ernest James, and I believe that everyone can and should live a life that is whole, healed, and healthy. And therefore, I'm on a mission to help people to deal, heal, and fulfill. To deal with your problems, to heal from the pain, and fulfill your purpose. Thank you guys once again for tuning in to the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast. If you haven't already, make sure that you listen, like, subscribe, and share to our podcast on all of your social media, out of our social media platforms. Make sure you guys are checking us out on our new YouTube channel, which is the Deal to Heal Podcasting Network on YouTube, where not only can you find the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast, but you also can find the Girl Dad Discussions podcast, where we talk to other girl dads like myself in order to combat the narrative of the absent father and the fatherless daughter. We have some great conversations with other girl dads, and sometimes we even have conversations with the daughters. So you can find the Girl Dad Discussions podcast as well as the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast, both podcasts, as well as some other podcasts on the Deal to Heal Podcasting Network on YouTube. So make sure you guys go there and check us out. Again, that's the Deal to Heal podcasting channel on YouTube. Make sure you guys check that out. As you guys know, we are a self-sustained podcast, and one of the ways that we stay on the air is by bringing you amazing products for you to purchase. Our product of the week for this week is our Purpose Journal and our Purpose Planner, because we believe that you should journal in order to keep track of where you've been and where you are, as well as plan for your future. So you can get your copy of the Purpose Journal and our Purpose Planner both on Amazon. The links are in the description, as well as some other great information in our description, including the information for our guests is also in the description. So make sure you guys check out our descriptions, whether you're listening to this on on a podcast platform or you watch it on YouTube. Make sure you check out the descriptions for the information that is there, because we have a lot of great information. Well, today, just like any other day, we are blessed with the guest, Mr. Christopher. How you doing?
Doing well. Thank you very much, Brother E. Thank you so much for having me, man.
No problem. We first of all, I want to say thank you for being on, because you could have been doing anything else with anyone else. but you're here with me and my listeners, and we definitely appreciate it. And we're going to jump right into things. So do me a favor, introduce yourself to my audience. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what it is that you do.
Absolutely. My name is Chris Lyles. I am originally from Columbia, South Carolina, but I've been living in the Charlotte, North Carolina area for over a couple decades now. So it's my surrogate home. And I've been in the financial technology area as a career almost 30 years now. And I am a first time author. So I'm excited about this new journey. It's not a necessarily a pivot from my daytime job, but I'm grateful to be able to have an opportunity to tell my story. It's a very unique one. So I'm grateful for the opportunity. Thank you.
All right, no problem. First of all, let me say congratulations on the book. I ain't even gonna talk about my book right now because I talked about it a lot on the podcast. And anyway, we just gonna skip past that. But congratulations on the
Thank
book,
you, brother.
which we're gonna talk about a little bit more here in a moment. But one of the things that I do know about you is that you are also a girl dad like myself. So whenever I have a
Yes.
girl dad on, I always ask two questions. So I'll ask you them same two questions. Number one, what does it mean for you to be a girl dad? And number two, what is something that your daughter or daughters have taught you?
Yes. So I have two daughters. And as a girl dad, our oldest daughter, she is 21, and our youngest is 11. Um, and we're a blended family. So my oldest, I've come into love relationship with her over the last 6 years, and between the oldest and the 10-year old, life is ever evolving.
Mhm.
It's brand new. So I know, for us as boys, our growth process looked a lot different than what
Yeah.
these girls go through in their maturation process. While I met my oldest daughter as she was coming out of her teens, or getting ready to go off into college, I didn't get much of her early teenage years, but I'm starting to get
Mhm.
some of that now with this young one in this new development. So I've been hearing the stories. I've been preparing and praying my heart to keep me centered and grounded as we go on this journey. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So what is something that you've learned from your daughters thus far?
Patience, I can say that one quick. Yeah, patience. It's a new dynamic to patience, and especially at this age,
Mhm.
at now 50, so having a 21-year old and a 10-year old at 50 years old, so it's like literally between two new and different worlds. So one going off into adulthood, and one that's just starting in adolescence, but I'm learning new dimensions of patience because they both
Mhm.
require their own set, and almost as if they're living in their own separate rules.
Right.
So where one that's the budding adult, that's a different level of patience that you have to have with their launch and their soft launch into life. And this new one that's discovering life for what it looks like as a young woman, as a young lady growing up, going starting puberty and all this other stuff that I just
Mhm.
have not been prepared for. So patience would be number one on the list.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I definitely understand that journey. My daughter is 22 at the time of recording this. But I will say this: I had a guest on, Dr. Carmen. She was on both podcasts, the Deal to Heal podcast, and also on the Girl Dad podcast. And her mission and part of her work that she does is help dads prepare and
Mm.
connect with their daughters during the not just during the menstrual cycle, but around the whole concept of the menstrual cycle.
Okay.
Because one of the things that she talks about is that generally that's a dividing part of
Mhm.
in a dad and daughter relationship. It's like, oh, your mom take care of that. You know what I'm
Right.
saying?
Right.
But it is a natural process, and especially if you are a girl dad, and your daughter is a daddy's girl, you want to be able to still maintain that relationship. And so she helped fathers navigate that space to be able to still be there for their daughters as they make those transitions and
Mhm.
experiences that they are able to have. Um, so definitely check out those episodes. There are some of our earlier episodes with Dr. Carmen. Definitely you want to check out those episodes. But yeah, so I definitely understand where you at. I just turned 49, so I'm right behind you in age. And like I said, my daughter is the youngest of my kids. So
Okay. Okay.
so I'm at the end of the
Okay.
journey. Well, not the end. I'm at the beginning of a new journey because now, like you said, she's 22. So now she's just now really, stepping out into those college years and things
Right.
of that nature. So that's just a whole nother beast. But
Right. Right.
we're here for the journey, right? But we're going to jump a little bit more into your story and the reason why you're here as being a first time author with a book about marriage, right? And so how did okay, let's kind of go to the beginning, right? Because I'm sure there was some life before the book, right, that inspired the book to get you to like, what, let me write some of this stuff down. And so take us to the beginning of this journey, um, talking about marriage, first of all, and then what prompted you to write the book, and then we can get more into the book after that.
Yeah, sure. And without giving too much of the book away, because I'd love for your listeners to go out and grab a copy. But literally, that's where the book starts. It starts from the beginning, man. It started from my early understandings of what relationship uh, has been, what it's looked like for me. Um, from early childhood, just understanding, the differences between how we as young men understand the language of love, or at least as it's interpreted to us, as it's translated to us from others. And then, into getting married really early and not really having a lot of the tools that I felt like I needed, or wasn't mindful really of me. I didn't really take much of an inventory of Chris as a person, of what he needed
Mhm.
really, really early, but ready to jump into the maturity of being able to handle and be responsible emotionally, mentally, and so on within the confines of a marriage, and it failed, utterly failed. I don't want to say utterly failed, because they're out of the union. We had two sons, and it was those were the blessings, and even still, there were lessons that came out of that. After I think it was 10 or 11 years, the
Mhm.
marriage ended, but then where I felt as if, well, the next resolve for me is to, get back on the wagon, so to speak, or get back on the horse, as they say. But I didn't understand the tenets of what healing really meant. Even in the title of your podcast, "Deal to Heal," like really understanding what the nature in any transition of life, the importance and the necessity of being able to heal. What the I underestimated the value of what that really meant for me. That wasn't even in my lexicon of understanding. So from there, out of one marriage, and shortly thereafter, right back into another relationship and right back into another marriage, um, and only to recycle and start to repeat and find a lot of the behaviors, a lot of the patterns that I was dealing with early on were still there, and a lot of the things that I needed the healing from in order to progress, I didn't learn the lessons. And what I found was, in in life, where you don't learn the lessons, you're doomed to repeat cycles,
Mhm.
and that's the space that I found myself in, repeating some of the same cycles, and that ended, in divorce as well. And at that point, I swore off marriage, and I wasn't even thinking about a book. I was fine and to content and move on with life. Um, and it was in that process, now realizing that healing was a necessity, Had to go and I had to go and find somebody's couch to sit on. I
Hmm.
had to find a therapist to start to work through some of these life issues, and really find out, what my drivers were. Had to find out what my why was, and that's coming out of that, or even actually in the process of going through that. My therapist was challenging me because I'd gone from one end of a spectrum to, being gung ho about marriage, and then I swung just as aggressively to the other end of that spectrum, going, "I'm done with it. I'm finished with it." And I had to dig a little deeper into what that was about. And in that exploration, I realized how I was wired, and why I thought the way I did. And in that, was a level of transparency and honesty that I hadn't yet found. And in that process, I met my wife now, as I was going through that process. And it was so refreshing that um, I found a relationship that allowed me to be honest and transparent about what I'd gone through and the lessons I had learned. And I wasn't being judged or castigated because of it, but in fact, found an embrace that I had never experienced before. So we've been married, and it's been the most amazing experience and time to be in this new space of life. To go from a space of, where I sworn I did it, thought I knew the world and all of that, and for it to come
Hmm.
crashing down, and then to swear it off, and then to find the courage to be able to do it again, and to see how in my own faith, how I believe God has restored and revived and just renewed this whole sense of who I was designed to be from the beginning.
Yeah, yeah. I want
So
to go
I'm
back.
sorry, and I'm sorry. You asked how the book came about. So it was in this new space that the prompting came to tell the story. I'd come across a lot of brothers that was like, you know, the amazing thing, and I talk about this in the book. Um, some brothers, some people want to know if you've come through something. They want to know, what's how do you do it, right? And for me, it was I had brothers that asked, "Well, hey man, how did you know you were ready for a divorce?" And it was in that conversation that I realized people were looking to me to validate, their reason for wanting to get divorced. And I went, well, that's not the story. That's
Mhm.
not it. And I just wanted to be able to tell the story, because a lot of people think that life ends in divorce. Life just begins when you learn the lessons from it, and you can pivot, you can relearn, and you can grow again. So that's where that's what became the genesis of the book.
Okay. All right. Yeah, and I know I always say my former pastor used to say all the time, said people ask how long would this test last, and he always said it lasts until you pass. And
There
so
you go.
if you don't learn it, it's coming right back. You know what I mean?
Every time.
But I want to go back to the beginning, because I want to ask you a question, because you said that when you got married the first time and you really didn't know yourself, or really didn't know I guess what you were really getting into at that point. But I want to ask you, what was your example of marriage before that? Did you grow up in a household with where your parents were together, or separate? Like, what was up to that point? Just your example of what a marriage looked like. Where were you getting your information from?
So my information was based. So my biological parents, my mother and biological father, I would say, were not married. But my mother, my stepfather's been in my life since I've been 3. So they got
Mhm.
married at during the course of their relationship. So he's essentially been
Mhm.
a father as well. So I've had both of my dads. So my parents, my aunts, uncles, have are all married, and lasting marriage relationships. So I think my data came from seeing those examples of what marriage was. But I think the gap in information came when I didn't have much from the male experience, or the male understanding of what being a husband really
Mhm.
was supposed to be, and what that really meant beyond paying bills, right? Beyond,
Yeah.
being there to do the manly household things. But what did it mean to be a husband from an emotional standpoint, from a mental standpoint, right? And obviously, you don't know what happens with your parents behind closed doors, but even physically, right? Like
Mhm.
when you got needs and she got needs, if y'all on the same page and what all of that looked like, right? I never really got what I felt to be the information I needed once I got into the space myself. And even in inquiring and asking, well, hey, how do you guys handle the math wasn't mathing?
Mhm.
Nobody knew.
And the reason why I asked that, so I myself has been married and divorced too, right? But I was raised in a two parent household my whole life until my mom passed away, with my mom and dad, and the example that I seen not just in my household, but like you said, having those aunts and uncles that was married and grandparents that was married, like generations of marriage, leading up until to my my family itself. And unfortunate, well, I'm not going to say unfortunate, however, the ways that it always worked out for me, one of the things that even led to this starting this podcast was coming to the realization that every woman I've ever dated was a fatherless daughter, right? And so every woman I've always dated have come from single parent homes, and where in my existence there are generations, I can count generations back of healthy marriages. The women I was attracted to is the opposite. They can go back generations of single mothers, and failed marriages or failed relationships, generations. And so that was kind of my reality. You know what I'm saying? And so I've always wanted to know. I was asked about people's example, like what was the example that they had, because I know there's different, examples that we have of how we even come to terms with what we think a healthy marriage looks like, you know. And so I want to talk a little bit, because one of the things that we talked about or mentioned, off air, was the fact that with you and myself also being in ministry, and then having to get, I don't know if you was in ministry when you got married, but getting married in ministry, getting divorced in ministry, and then getting remarried again, and just really thinking about how marriage, number one, affects your ministry as itself, right? And then also how the divorce affects the ministry, and then we to my remarrying, and now that's a whole nother thing. So let's go back to just the marriage itself, which I think for the most part in ministry, I think I don't want to say it's necessary, but I definitely think it's a healthy bonus when you're married, when you're going into ministry, because it should um, protect you from so many dangers, seen and unseen, in and out the pulpit. You know what I'm saying? And so, just in your perspective, what is the benefits of being married when you're trying to do ministry?
So let me speak. You want to go back to the beginning, but let me speak from where I am now and go backwards, because
Mhm.
my wife and I are both in ministry.
Mhm.
So understanding, what, to your point, what not only the responsibility is to ministry, but more so what your responsibility and accountabilities are to one another. Being in ministry, like knowing the call of ministry, has been, one of the most fulfilling things, for me, to know that another person gets it, like to know what the strain is, to know what the pull is, to know what the weight is, to know that another person also walks in the shoes of carrying the gospel, um, and even looking back through life and the relationships. So now going backwards, my when I first got married, I think maybe a few months later is actually when I accepted my call into ministry. But we were unequal. We were unequally yoked from a ministry, or from a um, I guess, a spiritual relationship standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
And that's important, right? Um, but all of that was kind of in the pot of me not doing a fair assessment, one of me, and um, what one of the things that often came up was just this statement alone. You know, that's your calling in ministry, not mine. Like just a statement like that alone, right? Makes a
Mm-hmm.
person feel like you're by yourself,
Yeah.
and you are alone because they don't understand the weight of it, right? And they may not have been wired to understand it.
Mm-hmm.
So, but looking back now, it's not something that I blame her for. It was just this was in fact my responsibility. It was my calling that I walked into. But nonetheless, not having the proper girding, not having the proper, you know, um, insight and hindsight,
Mm-hmm.
around it all, leaves gaps. It leaves you open. It leaves you susceptible. And certainly we all have to be accountable to the decisions that we make, and no one person or nobody's to blame for you making a decision. And that again, that's kind of what I outlined in the book, because this path, that I've been on has been an awakening for Chris. Chris holding up the mirror, going, "Now this." These patterns and cycles and behaviors, and even failures in marriage and ministry have been all resulted back or going back to decisions that I've made. So the onus, is on us, because oftentimes we think ministry is going to solve it all, and it won't.
Mm-hmm.
It's a book that's been a blueprint for humanity, but even the those within the book, they are flawed human beings. And when we learn to understand the value in the lessons that they learn and then apply it to our lives, it's where we can find the freedom in sharing this wonderful gospel. But oftentimes we see it as a cloak of, you know, as much as we know is not magic, we make it into this, you know, this magic idea that ministry is going to solve all your problems. No, that's when the hunt is on.
Mm-hmm.
That's when it's really game time. And unless you're yoked with somebody that really understands that, right, to understand the dynamics of what that means, it's warfare.
Yeah, yeah. And so, and when you start your ministry, or you accept the calling into ministry after you're already married, which
Mhm.
I think that becomes a problem too, because now you do have that other person, like, I didn't sign up for that, and then it also becomes a problem if that conversation was never even had beforehand. You know what I
Right,
mean? So it's almost like a feeling of betrayal, somewhat, for the person who's not called to ministry, because they're like, you already knew that's where you was going. You know what I'm
right,
saying? And you
right,
didn't have that conversation with me. So now you did. You basically signed me up for to be a part of something that I didn't agree to. And so that puts strain on the marriage as well. Because it's like you said, you were called, I wasn't. You know what I'm saying? But you could at least let me know you got the call. You know what I'm
E, and
saying?
I'm even raise it up.
I'm speaking from experience here. So
Man, listen, and I'm gonna raise it even higher. So after the first marriage, and of course having to deal with the stigma of, where, God hate divorce, and you're a preacher and you ought to reconcile and make it right. So I had to, go through all of that, and having to deal with the turmoil, the internal turmoil of those decisions. But after that, going into the next marriage, no, I raise it up. So I'm not even just in ministry. I go and actually start a church. So I start pastoring for about 6 years, and pastoring broken, leading while I'm limping, just trying to make it right, and even to receive the call to go into pastoring. That's, as you describe it, that's literally what I felt like it was. Like it was this tug of, hey, you already knew that this is kind of what your bend was, or what God had designed you for. They ain't nothing I signed up for, but you don't. Again, I wasn't mindful enough. I wasn't insightful enough. I wasn't wise enough. to be able to have those limiting, well, I'm saying limiting, but those disclaiming conversations up front to say, this is who I am. Like, are you a part of this journey? Can you be a part of this journey?
Right.
And honestly, I think, where we were at the time, sometimes when you have your eyes set on what you think you want, you're gonna give a yes to it without sometimes reading that. It's just like,
Yeah. Without reading the
them
fine
Debbie
print.
cakes that's in the them Debbie cakes that's in the cabinet. You want that Debbie cake, but you ain't looking at you ain't looking at that little bit of writing on the package. So
Right.
sometimes we forego the wisdom of the fine print because we want what we want, and we just proceed, and we don't proceed with caution. We don't proceed with wisdom, and that was the situation that I found myself in.
Yeah, yeah. I want to go back to something that you said about when you mentioned about going through the divorce, right? And especially being um in the forefront, being out front in ministry, and like you said, the topic of God hates divorce, and you need to reconcile, and then you're looked at to be this example of what it's supposed to look like, and then now you find yourself being in divorce, and of course, speaking for myself as well, because
Mhm.
um I think we were when I met my wife at that time. I was in a transition myself, as far as just early. I think we was late teens, early 20s, around that
Mhm.
time, and so I was in my own transition at that time when we met, and she invited me to come to her church, and so I started going to church with her. Now I'm a PK, so I
Mhm.
grew up in church, so church
Okay.
was, what I'm saying, it wasn't a big thing. But I ended up going to church with her, and long story short, ended up joining her church. We moved to that state, joined her church, and became active in ministry, like really active in ministry in that church, right? And so over the 10 years, I think our marriage was, from the day one, what I mean, I was active as a minister in that church, associate minister. And so we get to the end of this 10 years, which is kind of like our marriage. That's how long our marriage was. And now we're going through this divorce, but I'm still active in ministry. You know what I'm saying? I'm
Mhm.
still out front,
Mhm.
and of course, by that time, she had already kind of retreated, to the background and kind of faded out pretty much. But I'm still here, and I'm still having to, stand up before everyone, and, still be an example, even in the midst of divorce and that whole thing. And I remember having a conversation, with my pastor at the time, about, reconciling and trying to fix things and everything. You know, um, how did that play out in your experience, from the sense of the responsibility, if I want to say it that way, and the engagement of the congregation? Now, personally, for me, I had a lot of support, from the congregation and from the members, even in the midst of everything. So I didn't feel that there, even though it was a negative thing to be going through, I didn't feel negative energy from the congregation. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
If I could say so,
Mhm.
which was a good thing. But that's gonna lead to the next part of the conversation that I'm gonna bring up. But how was your experience? Even with that, going through that transition as a leader.
Man, listen, and it's amazing. I believe it's in the scripture where it says that there's nothing new under the sun, and we're talking about unfortunate circumstances, but how, and you and I are just meeting, but how parallel, a lot of our stories are. So for me, it was essentially the part of the same path. So I gotten to a point to where I knew that the relationship was done, and in fact, the book goes into a little detail of what that space was for me. But as a last ditch effort as well, she wanted to do a counseling with our pastor, and I was a youth pastor at this church. And I recall, having first of all a one-off conversation with him because he was, my senior leader. So I gave him the respect of, hey, this is what's happening. We're done. And he was like, "You sure?" Like, and I was like, "Well, yeah, we're we're done." And I said, "I know she's asking for for a counseling session, so we can go into that. But at the end of the day, it's just really out of respect for my position of being here. But I know that the marriage is done." So he was really to your point of just having support. He supported the decision, and in fact, I mentioned in the book he was one of the ones that said, hey, to be honest, looking on the outside in, I never knew anything was going on. Didn't know, half of what you were sharing, you guys were dealing with. So, to that regard, I knew that the support was there, but I also knew that she was also a grounded member there as well. So it was my decision then to relinquish my duties to say, hey, I'm okay to move on and and find whatever the new next is going to be. So it was reluctantly, he respected my decision and allowed me to be able to step away because ultimately I did not want to cause any rift or any issue. If nobody knew or if nobody, was aware of any of it, I wanted to keep it that way. So that was my intention in order to preserve the integrity of the ministry at the end of the day. So that was me stepping away. But again, it was with full support.
Okay. Well, your that part of the story is different from mine. Um,
Okay.
which is going to lead to my next question. So we were both members still at the church. And like I
Mhm.
said, at that time she was going through her own transition, so she had already kind of pulled back and was coming less and less, but I still was upholding my duties. And then after the divorce, I still was there.
Mhm.
A couple years after, I end up getting into another relationship and end up remarrying. Now, this is where it kind of got a little shifty because now at that time, the young lady that I was with, of course, she knew because I was active in ministry at that time. So she already knew, my responsibilities and things of that nature, and was willing to join me. Um, but we end up getting married, and she ended up coming to that church with me, you know, uh, which wasn't really a big deal, sort of, only because it wasn't a big deal where she was concerned as far as being my support, but it was a big deal just because of the familiarity of everyone else with my previous wife, because it was her church before I even came. You know what I mean? And
Mhm.
even though
Mhm.
at that time I was more active than she was, but it still originally was her friends and her family and her people. And so we were there a couple years before we transitioned out to start a church.
Mhm.
Myself and one of the other associate ministers ended up starting our own church. That church we ran for 10 years. He was the senior pastor, I was the executive pastor, until COVID came and pretty much shut us down. But just in that transition, like you said, you in your example, you stepped down. In my example, I was still going. You know what I mean? Because
Okay.
I'm like, hey, you know what I'm saying? That part, even though it does play a part, it was not the whole thing of my ministry. I just knew I had work still to do, there,
Yeah.
before I transitioned out. And so I stayed, and like I said, my when I remarried, my wife joined me there, because her pastor that of the church that she was going to married us. So we actually got married at her church, and we took um, marriage counseling, all of that with her pastor. And
Mhm.
so it was him, you know, mentioning to her and talking to her about, like, okay, if you accept this, that means you got to go where he's at. You know what I'm saying? You can't expect
Mhm.
him to follow you. Like, you got to go. And
Mhm.
so we had that conversation, and eventually she agreed, and so we went that way. Um, but that's just a different. That's one space where our things different. And I just was wondering, just like I know yours is so okay, let's go here. I stayed, brought my new wife there, and we served there for a while. You mentioned that you left, you stepped down from that space, but then eventually you started a church. Was that how long was that time period in between there?
So maybe 3 years, maybe 3 years from the divorce, stepping down, getting remarried, and mm, a year into 2 years into the new marriage is when I um, started a ministry and pastored for 6 years. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. And so how was that experience? Because now you're in the whole you're in a new marriage, but you're also in a new position too. When it comes to leadership. So again, and so now along comes all that pressure, if you want to call it pressure, that comes back to us. Okay, now you're expected to be the example of what is this supposed to look like.
Indeed. And I think for me, it was the um, miss, the scripture talks about counting up the cost. Like,
Mm-hmm.
Jesus telling the disciples, before you come with me, understand what this is going to mean, and count up the cost. And that was a concept that I did not explore fully, of what that cost really, what that really was going to mean, right? Sometimes we sensationalize, what pastoring really means, but to understand not only the responsibility, but again, going back to the weight, going back to, the and I don't mean burden from a bad perspective, but the burden of what it means to pastor and care for people. And how do you do that when you need to be pastored and cared for, right? And
Mm-hmm.
again, I thought it was the solvent, because I understood what I was equipped to do, what I was designed to do as far as ministry was concerned. But it just was not a space that I stepped into um, with a lot of wisdom. It was prayerful, amazingly. So it was in the fifth year of pastoring, and it was we were pastoring. We were in a shared space where we'd set up and break down, and then another service would come in after
Mm-hmm.
us in this facility. Um, and it was in the fifth year of doing that, and my youngest daughter, she was a newborn, and so just dealing with the having to go and set up, and you know just all of that, if you can imagine what every Sunday having to go and set up chairs. You have service time within a certain block of time, and you have to break
Mm-hmm.
it down and rinse and repeat, for the very next week. So for 5 years I get to this place, and just the frustrations of one, not growing, but two, understanding that the reason it wasn't growing is because I wasn't fully equipped or fully aware in this space of what it really required, and it wasn't even about the numbers. But I remember coming out after getting set up and coming out to minister, and it was just the look on everyone's face there. I don't know if that was the triggering moment, but just looking at the faces, and everybody's kind of waiting for, you know, and as I would put it, the show to happen and and I'm sitting there like, God, nah, this can't be what it was, that you called me to. And he literally said to me, I never told you to do it like this. And
Mm-hmm.
that was like heartbreaking. It was like one of the first eye-opening revelations that, from going out of a failing marriage, coming into a new marriage, rushing back into, or not even rushing back into, but rushing into this next phase, this next level of ministry, all without what I felt in that moment to be the conviction of not having a prayerful wisdom of what these steps would look like. I was just in a rush to get married again. I was in a rush to start ministry, to give the appearance that I had it together. I had it under control, and I was all right. Meanwhile, I was crumbling, bro. It was failing. My heart was breaking, and I didn't know, how to resolve it. So again, ministry failing, marriage failing. In my mind, I'm just losing it. And so as the ministry failed, so did my marriage as well. And my marriage wasn't being held together because of ministry, but it was another outcome of
Mhm.
those bad decisions. And so I had to sit in that for a while, man. And it took some time, in therapy sessions, just going through like what the whys are. And I think as men, we don't sometimes investigate your whys enough. Like, why are you doing this? Why you think this way? Why do you feel that? And uh, for it to not necessarily be emotional or emotional responses, but to ensure that you, going back to your earlier question, um, just ensuring that you have the right information that guides those decisions. But more importantly, that especially for us, as men of faith, that we're really relying on what is the Spirit saying. I don't know about you, but I was wired in the space of, well, God, if you ain't saying nothing, that means for me to go. And no, that ain't what that means. That means sit your butt down somewhere.
You ain't say stop, so I guess I'm gonna keep
You ain't
going.
say stop. So hey, we gonna make this happen. So
Man, I appreciate your honesty. Um, Definitely a lot of similarities in our journeys. But one of the things I'm glad that I heard you say was that you went to therapy, and for several reasons. Number one, as a man. Number two, as a black man. But even more important in this conversation, as a spiritual man. And as a leader, because I think a lot of time I definitely know growing up myself, being a PK, growing up in church, growing up around church people and preachers and pastors my entire life, um, a lot of times there's always was a disconnect. Like you had to choose. You know what I mean?
mhm,
Like either you gonna choose Jesus or you gonna go choose a therapist. And in my experience, and I think it is everyone's experience. I just think, growing up in the time period where I grew up, that was just the norm. But I do like the fact that you even said yourself that you went to therapy, because I think it's not either or. I think it's one and. You know what I'm saying? I think it's you got a spiritual man and you have a natural man, and they both need to be addressed. You know what I'm saying? And even in the Bible, it says first natural, then spiritual. So there is a part
mhm.
that we have to play with our natural man. Like there are some things that just naturally we just got to do, and we can't pray everything away. Some things you just got to change. You know what I'm saying? And we in our communities, we got high blood
Absolutely.
pressure and things of that nature. We can't just pray diabetes away. You got to stop with the sugar. You know what I'm saying? There's some things that we just have to change,
That's
and
it.
some things our
That's it.
natural
Get out
man
that
just
prayer
have
line.
to address. Yeah, yeah. Hey, for real. You know what I mean? And sometimes we just have to do that. So that definitely is a message that I push. There is some prayer that's always needed. Prayer is always needed, and is always called for. Yet and still, there's also a natural part that we have to do too. There's some things that God just ain't gonna do for us. And He's like, hey, I can heal you from diabetes right now, but if you ain't gonna stop eating the sugar, what's the
There you
point?
go.
You know what I'm
There you
saying?
go.
And so there's some changes that we have to make, and there's some things that we have to do. And so I definitely appreciate, you even saying that you went to counseling, because again, I definitely press both of them. We need our spiritual man, but we need our natural man to be addressed as well. So man, Chris, I love this conversation. We could be going forever. But before we get off here, let's just dive into the book just a little bit. What do you want the audience to walk away with when they finish reading the book?
If there were one central message, I would hope that the readers would get that when you get to a place to where you embrace being honest with yourself, that's a place of freedom. It's a place of transformation. It's a place of healing and wholeness. And the longer we carry the mask, the longer sometimes we delay with that healing. looks like, right? The more we carry the mask of, um, or we carry the weight of other people's expectations, sometimes, or the longer it delays, that healing process. So I would hope that my readers would uh, embrace not only what this journey has looked like for me, but in their relationships as well. I had someone to say, well, the just the title alone looks like it's negative. I don't know if I want to buy the book. You got cuss words in it and all of that, and you're supposed to be a preacher. And here we go with that narrative again. Uh, but in reality, what I'm really explaining in the book is, like individuals, we all have our own process and we all have our own journeys. And yes, even as you and I have been talking, and sharing this time, we find that there's some similarities in our journey, and where we can find in the similarities things that may have helped, or things that may have been a guiding principle, or something that you've gone through. I would like to know what that is, and hopefully can apply it to my life.
Mhm.
And going back to the point of therapy, for so long it's been the stigma and the taboo in our community, right? Therapy has only been for the crazy people. But when you find that there is, not only hope, but there's some treasures that are buried within our consciousness, and we experience so many different types of traumas in our life that we bury them, and we just find a way to survive and just move on. And oftentimes we're not living, we're existing, and we're in survival mode. And a lot of what I cover in the book is what that survival mode has looked like for me. But when I begin to turn the page, when I begin to make the pivots, and it started centrally, not only in, because again, I was functioning in the pulpit, I was functioning in brokenness, as far as ministry was concerned, but the natural man was failing, and he was bleeding out, and I had to figure out a way to be able to 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 gain some sense of understanding of what that was. So, as I progressed through the book, I'm detailing what those steps look like for me, and it's to you pointed it out. It's really just been that space of just being honest and being okay with your story, right?
Mhm.
It's your story, so why not tell it? Why not share it? And again, that's another stigma, in our families, in our communities. We don't share enough information that we should, right? We talk way more about stuff that don't matter, but the stuff that we
Mhm.
should talk about. There's a reason when you go to the doctor, the first thing they ask you is there anybody in your family with a history of dot dot dot? We don't
Mhm.
have enough conversations in our community about those dot dot dots, because in some cases those are the things that's leading to mental illness. Those are things that lead to health issues and so many other things, right? Do you ever wonder why? And I don't know if this has ever been your experience, but for me, um, there's a lot of things that men used to get from the barbershop, aside from a haircut. You
Mhm.
get some, you can go and get a you can you can go and get a burnt CD. You can go get a bootleg copy of your favorite movie. But along the way, there's some conversations in there that's life changing. You're hearing about Mr. Earl and what he's dealt with, and yeah, Mr. Somebody has some issue with prostate and so on. Right? We miss those community spaces where we can, especially as men, have opportunities to talk transparently, talk honestly, about life, and from that come out of those moments with, yeah, I do need to go and call my son or my daughter and repair that relationship, or yeah, I do need to go to the doctor, or yeah, I do need to, so some means of self assessment and becoming self-aware. So again, going back to your point, to your question, I think all of this kind of encompasses what this journey has looked like for me in the book. So I hope that it translates well. There's uh, a lot of my humor in there as well. So you're gonna get movie references. I'm a kid of the arts, so music and movies, have always been my jam. So I got a lot of references in there. So I'm hoping everybody enjoys it.
All right, all right. Chris, first of all, I want to say thank you for being on. Thank you for sharing your story, your expertise. Again, congratulations on the being the first time author, and I'm really want to see how this book works out because I'm interested in it. We definitely gonna have the links in the description for our audience. Um, I want you to leave us with a word of advice, inspiration, however you feel, from your heart, and also leave us with your social media handles and things of that nature where we can find you, to work with you, to follow you, to even where we can find the book. And so I'll give you a couple of seconds to think about that. To my audience, thank you guys once again for tuning in to the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast. Make sure you guys are following us on our website, dealhealfulfill.org. And also check us out on our new website, my new speaker's website, which is ernestjamesspeakslife.com. Again, that's ernestjamesspeakslife.com. So make sure you guys are also checking us out there. Also, make sure you guys check us out on our ebooks. Check out our ebooks at ebooksbyejames.com. Again, that's ebooksbyejames.com, where you can go and check out some of the ebooks that I've written, including the core four, which is the four core values that every daughter should get from her father. We talk about that ebook. We talk through that ebook on the Girl Dad Discussions podcast, where I talk with other girl dads and even sometimes daughters. And we talk about those four core values that I believe that every daughter should get from her father. But you can check out that ebook as well as From Nails to Men, and one of my favorite ebooks that I've written that's really being impactful right now is Forgiving Me, the 4-Step Guide to Self-Forgiveness. That ebook is doing a lot of great work right now, and we're doing a lot of great things with it. So you can find those ebooks at ebooksbyejames.com. Make sure you guys go there to check it out. Also, our podcast merch. So we also have our inspirational t-shirt line at deal2healtees.com. That's deal, the number 2, healtees.com. Put some inspiration in your situation. Wear an inspirational tee and be inspired all day. We not only do we have our inspirational tees there, but we also have our podcast merch, which is our t-shirts with our podcast logos on it. There's one with the Deal to Heal with James podcast logo, as well as one for the Girl Dad Discussions podcast logo on it. So again, make sure you guys go to deal, the number 2, healtees.com, deal2healtees.com in order to check out our podcast merch and our inspirational tees. Last but not least, over the last couple of years, I've been blessed to be a part of an organization called the Forgiveness Mission. And what we do, we have free virtual workshops every other month. And we talk about everything regarding forgiveness, forgiveness of self, forgiveness of others, forgiveness of the world, even how unforgiveness affects your body and your health. The podcast, not the podcast, but the workshops are absolutely free, but the information is priceless. And again, we do these bi-monthly. So whenever you're listening to this podcast, either one workshop just ended or there's one coming up, you can go to forgivenessmission.com in order to register for our next forgiveness workshop, or you can go to Eventbrite and look up the forgiveness workshop sponsored by the Forgiveness Mission in order to sign up that way. Again, that's the Forgiveness Mission at forgivenessmission.com. Mr. Christopher, once
Yes,
again, I
sir.
want to say thank you so very much for being on, for sharing your expertise, for sharing your experience with us. And I want you to have the last word, so the floor is yours.
Man, listen, brother E, listen, man. I'm so grateful that you shared your heart, you shared your platform, you shared your world with me. I can't thank you enough for the opportunity to be here with you and your listeners, and just grateful for not only the opportunity but for the relationship. I feel like I got a new brother now, so we're absolutely going to stay in touch, and I'm excited to see all of the work that you're doing. I've been able to catch a few of the episodes, so I'm thankful for not only the energy but the spirit in which you operate, as well as all that you're putting out into the world, man. And I'm just grateful for all that you're doing, and I'm looking forward to connecting with you again. For all of your listeners, you can connect with me via social media or Instagram. or even the website at www.don'taskmeaboutmarriage.com. Facebook and Instagram, the same handles. Don't Ask Me About Marriage. And look forward to connecting with each of you. Go out and get a book. Here's the book here. Go and get you a copy of it. And I'm looking forward to hearing what you think about it. I want you to read it. If you get a smile or a chuckle in there too, or and I'm looking forward to having the opportunity to converse with you. And I'll leave with this. So there's an excerpt in the last part where I state this: if you're thinking about marrying again at some point, good for you. Pray, heal, listen, grow. And I can't forget, be patient. Let wisdom and peace guide you into your new next, and may you find God's joy for your heart. Finally, to every reader, despite your marital or dating status, or if you're happily married, don't worry about anything. Instead, pray about everything. Tell God what you need and thank Him for all He has done. Then you will experience God's peace, which exceeds anything we can understand. His peace will guard your heart and your minds as you live in Christ Jesus. Philippians 4:6-7. Thank you again, brother. Go and get the book.
No problem.
Love y'all. Appreciate you, man.
Yeah. Look forward to having you on the Girl Dad Discussions podcast, so we can talk about these raising these daughters, which is a whole nother journey. Journey. But to my listeners, we can't end it no better than that. Thank you for tuning in once again to the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast, where our mission is to help people to deal, to heal, and to fulfill, to deal with your problems, to heal from the pain, and to fulfill your purpose. Until next time, you guys be blessed. Thanks for listening to the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast. Remember to listen, like, subscribe, and share. This episode has been brought to you by Deal to Heal Teas. Put some inspiration in your situation. Wear an inspirational tea and be inspired all day. Let's go to dealtohealteas.myshopify.com. Remember, our mission is to help you to deal, heal, and fulfill. Deal with your problem, heal from the pain, and fulfill your purpose. Thanks for listening.